The object didn't burn up on entry. It wasn't a meteor, and it wasn't a rescue ship. It was a black marker. A double helix monolith that slammed into the center of a dense urban metropolis with the force of a tactical nuke. But the impact crater wasn't the problem. The signal was. Within hours, the dead didn't stay dead. The local biomass began to shift, crack, and repurpose itself. The city became a dead space, a zone where cellular death is just the beginning of a new, horrifying life cycle. Then, a different kind of energy signature spiked in the center of the crater. A slipgate portal tore open, glowing with argent energy. Out stepped the Doomslayer. He wasn't there to investigate. He was there to purge. He carried the full Doom Eternal arsenal and the Praetor suit, a walking tank designed for hell, now standing in the middle of an alien infection. Today, we're running the ultimate biological simulation. We aren't just asking if he can shoot him. We're testing the scientific limits of his immune system, his armor's tensile strength, and his psychological firewall against a hive mind that eats civilizations. Scenario 1. Biological contamination and suit integrity. The Slayer steps onto the pavement of what used to be a financial district. The air here isn't just smog. It's a suspension of viral spores and recombinant bacteria. In the Dead Space universe, you don't need to be bitten to get infected. You just need to breathe. The narrative beat here is crucial. The Slayer is surrounded. Standard slashers, reanimated corpses with blade limbs, shamble out of the fog, while pukers launch corrosive bile from the rooftops. Let's look at the threat on a microscopic level. The Necromorph pathogen is terrifyingly efficient. It doesn't behave like a standard virus that hijacks a cell to replicate. If the Slayer has even a single open wound, or if the air filtration in his helmet fails for a microsecond, the infection enters his bloodstream. Once there, the pathogen signals a rapid mutation, converting muscle to bone and stomach acid to bile. But the Slayer isn't wearing standard suppression gear. He is in the Praetor suit. According to the lore logs in Doom, this armor was forged by the wretch in hell itself and is capable of withstanding direct exposure to the vacuum of space and the toxic atmosphere of Mars. The real physical test comes when the combat starts. A slasher charges. Its weapon is a calcified bone blade, evolved to shear through standard engineering rig suits. We can estimate the tensile strength of those bone blades to be similar to organic diamond. Against an engineer named Isaac Clarke wearing a mining suit, that's lethal. Against the Praetor suit, it's a different story. The Slayer's armor is designed to take impacts from argent energy projectiles and the physical blows of a Baron of Hell. In terms of material physics, the Praetor suit acts like a hardened carapace that exceeds the hardness of the Necromorph's bone blades. When a slasher strikes the Slayer's chest plate, the blade wouldn't cut. It would shatter. The puker's acid's more dangerous, potentially eating at the seals, but the suit's tolerance for hell's lava suggests extreme thermal and chemical resistance. So, here is the verdict for the first tier. The Praetor suit acts as a perfect biological Faraday cage. The infection cannot get in because it cannot touch him. The Slayer is effectively a walking, sterile environment. As long as the suit maintains integrity, the biological agent that wiped out the colony is harmless to him. But as he pushes deeper into the city, the threat stops being about biology and starts being about physics. The local biomass is waking up, and it knows he's there. Scenario 2. Kinetic overload and swarm dynamics. The Slayer turns a corner, and the individual attacks stop. The hive mind has taken notice. The ambient moans synchronize into a single deafening shriek. This is the moment in Dead Space where the game throws a brute or a massive swarm at you to test your ammo management. For the Slayer, this is just Tuesday. Let's look at the biology of the enemy here. Necromorphs are scientifically fascinating because they defy the standard zombie trope. They don't need a head. You can shoot a slasher in the face 5 times and it'll keep coming because the infection has decentralized the nervous system. The only way to stop them is strategic dismemberment, removing the limbs to physically incapacitate the vessel. This presents a unique challenge for the Slayer's arsenal. Standard ballistic weapons in Doom are designed for trauma, blowing massive holes in targets. But would the super shotgun work? Absolutely. We ain't talking about standard 12-gauge buckshot here. The super shotgun delivers enough kinetic energy to knock back a multi-ton mancubus. Against the brittle, calcium-rich structure of a necromorph, a single blast wouldn't just sever a limb, it would likely atomize the entire torso. However, there is a massive scientific variable we need to calculate: the Argent factor. In Doom Eternal, the gameplay loop relies on the push-forward combat mechanic. You chainsaw enemies to get ammo. You glory kill them to get health. The lore explains this as the Slayer harvesting Argent energy released from the demons. Here's the problem. Necromorphs are not demons. They are biological puppets animated by an alien signal. They have no soul. They contain zero Argent energy. If the Slayer chainsaws a slasher, he's just going to get a face full of infected slurry. No ammo drops, no health packs. For the first time, the Slayer faces a resource crisis. His guns will eventually click dry. But does it matter? We have to look at the Slayer's physical stamina. In the Doom lore, the Slayer fights for eons in hell without rest, food, or water. His caloric output is effectively infinite. When the ammo runs out, the physics of the fight shift from ballistics to blunt force trauma. A necromorph requires its limbs to be removed. The Slayer can do that with its bare hands. We're looking at a scenario where the glory kill isn't a mechanic for resources. It's the most efficient way to neutralize the threat. He doesn't need to shoot him. He just needs to tear him apart. The swarm dynamics at Dead Space rely on overwhelming the victim's limited stamina and panic response. The Slayer has neither. He becomes a thresher maw of violence, physically dismantling the swarm one limb at a time until the street is silent again. The kinetic threat is neutralized, but as the Slayer reloads his empty weapons and looks down the crater, the air changes. The attacks stop coming from the street and start coming from inside his own helmet. Scenario 3. Neural invasion and the marker signal. The Slayer walks into the epicenter of the crater. The physical swarm recedes, leaving an eerie silence. This is the eye of the storm. Standing before him is the black marker, a twisting double helix monolith pulsating with a red rhythmic glow. The battle shifts here from the physical plane to the psychological one. In Dead Space, the marker is not just a statue. It is a broadcast tower. It emits a specific electromagnetic signal that directly targets the limbic system of any sentient being within range. The signal bypasses the sensory organs and rewrites the brain's pattern recognition software. It forces the victim to hallucinate their deepest regrets and dead loved ones to manipulate them into making us whole. For a normal human, this results in rapid onset dementia, paranoia, and eventually a compulsion to commit suicide to protect the marker. But the Slayer presents a unique variable for this alien software. To understand why, we have to analyze the Slayer's psychological profile compared to a standard Dead Space protagonist like Isaac Clarke. Isaac was an engineer riddled with guilt over the suicide of his girlfriend Nicole. The marker weaponized that guilt, using Nicole's avatar to guide and torment him. The mechanism requires a host with complex emotional fractures, cracks where the signal can seep in. The Slayer does not have cracks. He has a singular, solidified drive. While he has trauma, specifically the death of his pet rabbit Daisy and the fall of the Night Sentinels, he does not process this trauma through grief or guilt. He processes it through absolute, unadulterated rage. If the marker attempts to project a hallucination at Daisy to lure the Slayer into a false sense of security, it misunderstands the subject entirely. Seeing his dead pet wouldn't make the Slayer weep. It would remind him exactly why he hunts. The manipulation attempt would be perceived not as a comfort, but as a mockery. This leads us to the feedback loop theory. The marker signal is a two-way street. It reads the mind to project the hallucination. If it attempts to read the Slayer's mind, it's attempting to interface with a consciousness that has spent eons in hell, absorbing and inflicting infinite violence. The sheer volume of aggression and traumatic memory stored in the Slayer's neural pathways would likely overload the marker's local influence. It's the cognitive equivalent of plugging a smartphone into a fusion reactor. The signal wouldn't seduce him, it would likely backfire, creating a feedback loop of pure hatred that the marker cannot dampen. Furthermore, lore suggests the Slayer possesses a divine will that makes him incorruptible. In scientific terms, we view this as a psychological firewall that's simply too dense for the marker's frequency to penetrate. The signal fails to induce dementia because the Slayer's already operating in a state of hyper-focused insanity, a functional psychosis directed entirely at the destruction of his enemies. The verdict for this tier is clear. The marker fails to infect the Slayer's mind because he desires nothing it can offer. He doesn't want peace, and he doesn't want to be whole. He wants to kill. The psychological attack only serves to spike his adrenaline levels, removing any inhibitions he might have had. The marker, realizing its subtle influence is useless against a being of pure will, is forced to abandon the mental war. It realizes that if it cannot control this variable, it must physically crush it. The ground begins to shake, not from a portal, but from the planet itself cracking open. Scenario 4. Planetary scale necrosis. The Brethren Moon. The marker realizes its mistake. The subtle knife of psychological warfare has shattered against the granite wall of the Slayer's mind. So, it abandons subtlety. It initiates the ultimate escalation, convergence. The ground beneath the crater doesn't just shake, it tears open. The biomass of the entire infected city, millions of tons of flesh, bone, and concrete, begins to levitate, swirling upward into the stratosphere. The marker isn't just calling for backup, it is birthing a god. The dead matter aggregates in orbit, forming a Brethren Moon, a celestial organism thousands of kilometers wide, capable of consuming entire civilizations. Scientifically, the scale of the battle has shifted from biological to astronomical. We are no longer calculating the force of a punch. We're calculating the energy required to destabilize a planetary body. A Brethren Moon attacks with gravitational shear forces and tentacles the size of skyscrapers. Against this, the Slayer is effectively a microscopic organism. Let's analyze the ballistics. The BFG 9000 is the most powerful handheld weapon in existence, capable of boiling the blood of every demon in a room. However, the BFG relies on argent energy tracers to chain react with demonic biology. Against a Brethren Moon, which is purely biological matter without an argent signature, the BFG is simply a massive plasma cannon. It would scorch the surface, perhaps creating a crater the size of a stadium, but against a target the size of a moon, this is a pinprick. It lacks the deep core penetration required to kill the host. This leads to the gut check. To win, the Slayer must physically traverse the vacuum of space to enter the organism. We know the Praetor suit is vacuum rated, and we know the Slayer can survive being shot out of an ion cannon. He would likely use the floating debris of the destroyed city as platforming anchors, meat hooking his way through the gravity well and into the maw of the beast, effectively treating the orbital debris field like a platforming puzzle from Doom Eternal. Once inside the moon's internal structure, the physics shift back to the Slayer's advantage. The Brethren Moon is, ultimately, a biological entity. It has a heart, it has a brain, and the Slayer has the Crucible. This energy blade was forged to permanently kill Titans. The Crucible works by cauterizing biological energy at the source. If the Slayer plunges that blade into the central neural cluster of the moon, He doesn't need to blow it up, he just needs to turn it off. The Brethren moon is just a titan made of astronauts. The blade stays in the beast. The neural activity ceases and the moon dies. It is a definitive kill mechanism for an entity that usually requires a planet cracker ship to defeat. So, what is the result of our simulation? We ran the Doomslayer through the absolute worst the Dead Space universe could offer. Biologically, his Praetor suit acts as a perfect sterile environment, rendering the infection useless. Kinetically, his physical strength allows him to dismantle the swarm without relying on the limited resource economy of the Dead Space universe. Psychologically, his singular rage creates a mental firewall that the marker simply cannot hack. And on a planetary scale, he possesses the specific Titan-killing weaponry required to euthanize a Brethren moon. The Necromorph threat relies on three things: biological vulnerability, resource scarcity, and psychological fear. The Doomslayer possesses none of these things. The marker would realize too late that it didn't trap the Slayer on Earth. The Slayer trapped the marker. The only real casualty in this scenario is likely the Earth itself. The collateral damage of a battle between a demigod and a necrotic moon would likely leave the planet uninhabitable. But if you want to see if the flood from Halo stands a better chance, let us know in the comments. Subscribe for more science, and we'll see you in the next timeline.